for a cornucopia of reasons, but it's the original exercise for this was specifically targeted at removing dust from film scans. So that's what we're going to start with right now. So if you can go into our session 8. Hard to believe we're halfway through the semester. Inside your student files for session number 8, there is a photo in there called dustremoval.psd. If you could open that up for me in Photoshop, that'd be great. Picture of a guy and a girl on the beach. So this actually was shot from a piece of film and scanned. And if you zoom into the upper left-hand corner, you'll see the problems that we actually have in here. Screen a little bit brighter. So you can see that there's a bunch of dust on this. There's a scratch on the piece of film as well. If we take a look over, you can see there's dust spots that are sort of all over her face. There's a bunch of stuff. There's a scratch going right down the middle of this guy's chest onto the surfboard. I mean, it's a mess. So how would you get rid of all of this? So most of you guys would go after this with the clone stamp tool. The problem with the clone stamp tool is that, number one, it takes forever. And number two, you run into real problems, especially if you look at the stuff on his chest. Trying to remove this dust and not actually fuck up the hair pattern that's on his chest is going to be a challenge as well. And then when you actually move from his chest onto his onto the jacket, that's going to be another challenge. And there's so much of it. If you take a look, at her legs, you take a look around, all of this kind of stuff, it's a mess. So I'm going to strongly suggest that you do not use the healing brush tool to do this. I'm going to show you a much better trick in doing this. And again, keep your mind open because this sort of workflow can do work for other things as well. So anyway, here we go. First thing is to make a copy of your background layer. So select the background layer, hit Command J, we'll make a copy of it. Again, we work non-destructively in this class, so all the retouching that we do is actually going to be on this layer. So the next thing I'm going to do is use a filter to try to remove this stuff. So come up to the filter menu, come down to noise, and over to dust and scratches. So if you don't know where I am, take a look at my screen up here really quick, up to the filter menu, down to noise, and down to dust and scratches. And go ahead and say okay to that. And I'm zoomed in, again, looking at this area in the top left-hand corner. I'm zoomed into about 200%, which is a good place to be for this to really make sure you can see what it is we're seeing. When Dust and Scratches opens up, you'll actually see there's two controls on it. There's radius and then there's threshold. I'm going to ask you to zero them both out. Radius you can't get below 1, but threshold you can get down to 0. So this is what these two, I want to explain what they both do to begin with, and then I'll show you actually how to use them. So the first one is radius, and what radius is going to do is it's going to look at how big your dust spot is. So if you can look on your screen right here, you'll see you've got a bunch of small little dust spots, but then there's some bigger dust spots that are on there. I'm looking especially at this guy right here. He's pretty much the biggest of them. If you start out with a small radius, like a radius of 2, we'll start to get rid of the little dust spots. A radius of 3, we'll get rid of the medium ones. A dust 4, we'll get hopefully, and work your way up there. The same thing will hold true for the scratch that's on here. Now, if we had one giant blob of dust on here, I would not use the radius to go get it. What you really want to do is you want to use a radius that gets rid of the vast majority of your dust. If there's one exceptional giant hawking piece of dust on there, just use the clone stamp tool or the healing brush tool to get rid of that guy and don't worry about it. But you don't want to overset this tool. You don't want to get it any higher than you absolutely have to get it. So that's what the radius tool will do, and it's the first tool that you set. The second tool that you set is the threshold, and what the threshold is looking for is how much difference in tone between your piece of dust and the background do you need for this tool to actually work. So with a setting of 0, what you're saying is that any difference, so if you had a piece of dust that was that had an RGB value of 62 and you had a background that was 62, you would never see the dust. If you have a background of 63 though, there is a small difference, there is a 1-point difference. In this case, the threshold controls whether you would actually remove that dust or not. If you take your threshold and you drag it all the way up to the right-hand side, you'll see it goes all the way up to 255. This is just the tonal range that you're saying. And again, what you're saying is how much difference do I need between two values to consider this as a piece of dust? What really ends up happening in this, especially for people who are shooting relatively fast film, something that's got a lot of grain to it, is that what happens when you adjust the radius slider, when you start to pull it up, it's going to soften your image. And then you use the threshold slider, you raise it to restore the film grain, to bring the film grain back. This is a piece of EPP not 120, EPP 35 millimeter film. It's a color slide film. It's got a very fine grain to it. This actually may even be Fujichrome, I don't know. But you're not going to really get a lot of film grain in this. It's never going to come back. But nonetheless, you'll see what it is we're talking about. So your first job is to actually just do the radius. So I typically select the radius button and then I use the arrow keys. So I'm going to tap my up arrow key to go to a 2 and see what disappears. And I'm going to tap my up arrow key again to get to a 3 and see what disappears. Now I've done this one long enough to know that I need a high enough radius to get the scratch to disappear. A lot of the smaller specks of dust will actually already have disappeared. So anyway, I'm going to continue my journey up on that. I'm going to hit a 4 on mine, and at 4 I feel like that the scratch has almost completely disappeared. I'm going to go to a 5 and the scratch has completely disappeared. Now I'm going to go to my threshold, because if you take a look at your figure right now to see what's actually happened, you can use your little preview check mark in the dialog box to turn it on and off. You'll see that the image has been massively softened. That's really how it's getting rid of this. So now I'm going to go to my threshold slider, and again, I want to get my threshold slider up to the point where I see the scratch start to reappear again. That'll give me, again, you want the highest threshold that you can get and still have it be doing the job that you need it to do. So I'm going to drag mine up to a 2, to a 3, to a 4. I'm up to a 6 now. Oh, and my preview is still on. Let me turn my preview off really quick. All right, just to make sure I can find out where this guy is. And I'm going to continue to drag it up. So long about, I'm going to say a 7. Yeah, a 6 is where I start to see, again, at 7, a threshold of 7, I start to see the scratch again. At 6, I'm actually losing it. So I'm hitting these things as hard as I can hit them. So this is actually going to be my dust removal. So if you want the same as me, I've got a radius of 5, a threshold of 6. Again, if you use your preview check mark on and off, you'll see what it is we are actually removing from all this and what we're keeping. So I'm going to go ahead and say OK to that. Now at this stage of the game, it's actually ruined the majority of your image. Your image is now, or this image is actually extremely soft. We are going to leverage working with history states to actually change this and to work with this better. So your next move is to come over to your history palette, and you want to click on the little camera at the bottom of the history palette to create a history state. Wow. And you're going to name that history state Dust and Scratch. And say OK. Now at this stage of the game, you will actually have a history state that shows you, or a history in your history layers, or your history, the states underneath, not the snapshots, but the states underneath. You can actually see where you ran that dust and scratch filter. We need to go back one step. So go back to your layer via copy. So now what I have is, I've got the image exactly the way it looked. I've got 2 layers, so I've got the one that I'm going to retouch, but I've also got a history state up at the very top. The first one says, the very first history state says dustremoval.psd. That was just the name of the file when we opened it. The next one is the dust and scratch. It's what this image looked like when I ran that filter. Does that make sense to everybody what this is? So this is the power of using these history states. So you want to actually click, you do not want to select the dust and scratch state. You merely want to click on the little box to the left-hand side of it to use this state for the history brush. So I'm not returning to this state. If I return to this state, if I clicked on the state itself, on the description of the name of it, whatever, this whole image would return to it. It's not what I want. I want to be able to use the history brush to selectively do this filter on areas that need it and not touch anything else. Does that make sense? Okay. If you've got a tablet, now would be a good time to do it. We're going to use tablet pretty much a good part of the day today. So now would be a good time to plug yours in. I'll give everybody a second to do it. Are we good? Okay, so here's the trick about doing this. We want to do as little damage as we can possibly do to this file. So when I look at this, I can see the big old scratch and I can see the little blotches of dust here. Those are the only things I want to change. I don't want to change anything else in this image. Nothing. So one of the advantages of using the history brush is that you can be very precise about where you want to actually paint with this filter. But the other thing is that history brush actually has blending modes, and I can use the blending modes to restrict where this happens, to what happens, what gets changed even more. So to see what that means, again, I've clicked on the space that's just to the left of the dust and scratch state and put that little history brush icon in that little square. Now to go to your history brush, it is the icon that's right underneath the clone stamp tool. If you click on it, you'll get a flyout menu, and there's two options in here. There's the history brush tool. There's also the art history brush. You don't want to use art history brush. You want to use the history brush tool. And then finally, looking at your options bar up at the very top, we are going to click on this. We are going to make this, I'm going to do a medium hard brush. Again, the history state itself is going to control where the brush actually operates, so I'm not so concerned about the edge, but there's a middle brush will give me the best of both worlds. It'll give me the control of a hard brush, but it'll also give me a little bit of the softness of a soft brush. So I'm going to put my brush hardness right in the middle. I am going to leave my blending mode normal right now. I'm going to leave my opacity to 100% and my flow at 100%. I am going to change my blending mode now though. So again, the blending mode of the brush, which is in the options palette, on the options bar at the very top, click on that drop down menu and you're going to come down to lighten, because I have got dark spots, dust spots showing up on my image, and all I want to do is lighten them. So the reason this is important to us is that all this area that is around these that's around these pieces of dust, you're not changing them at all. You're not making them darker or lighter. All I'm saying is in here that anything that I'm doing that was lighter in the history snapshot, in the history state, I want you to apply that. On the areas that are around this piece of dust, none of that changed. When we actually did that filter, none of this stuff changed here. So all I want to do is lighten this dust spot and not affect anything that's around it. I'm going to make my brush considerably smaller. Again, you don't want to be painting on areas that do not need to be fixed. But now, instead of using the clone stamp tool where you have to do all sorts of sampling and all of that kind of stuff, I don't need to do any of that. All I need to do is paint right over the little dust spots, and I get rid of them all. And then I'm just going to paint right along the scratch that's there, and I can get rid of it all as well. And right now, for the people who shoot film, you should be jumping up and down with joy, because it doesn't get any simpler. There's nothing involved with doing anything, selecting, picking, sampling, all of that. It's just gone. Did this work for everyone? If you've done all that, I want you to go back over to your history palette, and I want you to undo all of the history brushes. So I'm going to go back up to where mine said layer via copy. It brings back all the dust and scratches. So this still involves doing a lot of screwing around with this. It's a lot of handwork. You can actually do larger areas in a different way. So I'm going to zoom back out now just a little bit. I'm going to grab the lasso tool, the L key, and I'm going to select. Again, I'm going to avoid all of the figure, but I'm going to select this entire upper left-hand corner, all of the beach. So I'm just going to start dragging a line out. I'm going to stay close to his body. I'm going to go up here and just come all the way back around. So I've selected this big old upper left-hand corner. Is that working for all of you? Again, I just made a selection, freehand selection of the upper left-hand corner. Are we good on this part? Yes? Okay. Instead of using your brush, you can actually fill with history. To do that, come up to the Edit menu, come down to Fill, and in the dialog box that opens up for your contents, use the drop-down menu and go to History. In the blending mode, you still want to restrict this to only lightning. So in the blending mode of the history fill, click on that drop-down menu and come down to lighten. And then simply say OK. And it gets rid of all the dust in that giant area. But look at all the tonal detail it kept. You don't get all that blur. You don't get any of that shit. Hit Command D to deselect. Go back to your history brush. And then we need to look at the scratch that's going along this guy's chest. So I'm going to start on the scratch all the way up on his jacket. You can see the jacket that's up by his chin. You can see little dots of that scratch all the way up there. Simply click on this and drag all the way down. You don't need to resample anything. You can come all the way down through his chest, down to his stomach, and you get rid of all of it. It's that simple. There's scratches on the surfboard. They just disappear by magic. It's insane. Again, if you do this kind of work, this will knock hours off of your retouching. If we go all the way over to the girl, the far right side of the girl, where she's holding the guy's hand, if you look down on her shoulder, or sort of the sleeve area, or the front part of her shirt, you'll see that there's a little white dust spot down there. So this is the way dust works. So in doing dust, if it's on your film, any dust that's on a dark background will show up as light. Any dust that's on a light background will show up as dark. So in this case, because the shirt is darker, the dust that we have on there is light. That's why it's showing up here. It's that little, can everybody find that little piece of, that little white speck of dust? Okay. If we now try to use our history brush on that, you'll see nothing happens. And the reason nothing happens is because I've got my blending mode set to lighten. You simply need to change your blending mode from lighten to darken, and now you can get rid of the dust spot that's on her shirt, that's on the shirt. So that is the only thing that you need to do to remove all the dust. The rest of it, you can just walk through and bang this stuff out as easy as it can possibly be. Questions about this? Yes? So you're set to darken, you're on that part, you do have the history brush done, 100% opacity, 100% flow. That's normal. Did it work for the darker ones?
No, but like it worked for this one when we were doing this one.
Try it again, just see if that'll still, if your history brush still works. All right, that part still works. So then let's go back to the other one.
This one?
No, the thing that's on her shoulder. Yeah, that guy right there. And then change this to darken. And then try painting that out. Try doing it with your trackpad instead of your tablet. Huh. Save this file and quit Photoshop and restart it.
Should I exit out this one?
Oh, wait, if you restart this, you're going to lose the history state. Keep this up. Let's deal with this after the class. Okay? Oh, we'll just redo it. We'll just redo it, but we'll do it after class, okay? Yeah.
Is that no more? I can still see the mark.
If you still see the mark on it, it just means that you needed to either raise the radius or lower the threshold. You brought it back. And again, there's nothing to stop you from doing it again. So here, if we go here, if you're feeling like you're still seeing a mark that's running down his chest right here, then we're simply going to redo this. You can go all the way back up to the top. You can click your via layer copy. That will bring it back to the original part. This dust and scratch state that we made, you can actually throw that away, and we're just going to do the process all over again. It should be sticky. I'm hoping that it still has the values that we had before. So I'm going to go up to filter, over to noise, to dust and scratches. It is sticky, it brings it up, so I'm going to simply raise my radius here to 6 and drop my threshold down to 6 as well, and say OK. Again, do another history snapshot, call it dust and scratch. Say OK. Go back one step in history so that it brings all of it back. Grab your, put the little icon right next to the dust and scratch history state. Grab your history brush. Make sure it's set to lighten in this case. And drag right across it. And it should take care of it this time. Okay, you can close this guy up. We do not need to save that. We do not need to deal with that or this. Okay, so part of the reason that I had this whole conversation about the ethical implications, the moral implications, all the implications about doing what we did. So let me ask you this. If you were to take a picture of me and I was going to sit here like this, on this screen like this, and I did this to my face, would you be okay retouching the wrinkles out of my face? Say what? I just say, would you be okay with doing that? I like the way you think. Yeah. What's it pay? Yeah, well, exactly. Okay. The point that I'm trying to make in all of this is that we're going to do liquefy right now, and it is body modification. And what I'm hoping you will be willing to do, like we did last week, is overlook the overarching implications of whether we should be doing this stuff or not. That's not the conversation. We've already started this conversation. That's not a conversation that will probably ever end. But it's incredibly important for me to show you guys how to use these tools, and the images that we're going to work on might be offensive to some people to be doing the work that we're doing. I'm going to ask you to overlook that strictly for the practice and the exercise part of this. Are you guys comfortable with that? Because if somebody's really not comfortable with that, I'm okay. You just need to let me know. Is that fair? Okay. So, if you choose not to do it at all, you get no grade, which doesn't impact things one way or the other, and that sort of thing. But what I will say is this. So even though we're going to work on very obvious things about, making parts of bodies bigger, parts of bodies smaller, all of that kind of stuff, whatever, you'll end up finding this in your own retouching, even very subtle things. There are things that can happen photographically. So when you think about making a photograph, we always think about, what do you really, this is the phrase I use for everybody. When somebody asks me what I do for a living, I say I take a three-dimensional object, I turn it into a two-dimensional object for a one-dimensional person. And that describes commercial photography in a nutshell. That's just what I do. However, the part where you're going from that three-dimensional to two-dimensional, weird shit can happen. So, and when it does, that's not always the best thing. So sometimes, like for instance, if you took a picture of me here, I'll just do this really quickly. So imagine you guys are the camera, and I go like this, and you take a picture of me like this. My elbows are going to be very big, especially if you use a wide-angle lens. They're going to be huge, right, relative to my face. My face is going to be really small, right? Or let's say you're even worse. Let's say you actually going to take a picture of just my face. Sorry, I don't know why everybody in the world feels like they need to get a hold of me today. Really close to my face with a wide-angle lens, then my nose becomes enormous and my eyes become these little beady things in the background, right? And if that was not your intention, you need to know how to fix that in post. And all of that falls under Liquify. Okay, so in Liquify, you could take that really big nose of mine that isn't really that big. Actually, my ears are big though. I've always had this thing about my ears, and I don't know it, but I think this is true. This could be urban myth, but I think this is true. I think your ears never stop growing. Yeah, no, that's great, right? Great. So anyway, I know, right? I'm totally lost. So anyway, the problem with my face that you did using the wide-angle lens is not that I have this giant nose and these beady little eyes, it's just the way that you actually shot it. So again, you can use Liquify to make my nose smaller, my eyes larger, and you're off to the races, right? So anyway, I just want you to frame it in that way. I don't want you to think that I'm looking for some ideal body type, that's not what this is all about. Is everybody okay with that part? Okay. So we are going to start first with an old school way of dealing with this. It's not really Liquify at all, but I want to talk about these. Oh, by the way, I don't know if you've noticed this or not, but if you've got a roommate, I'm always coming up with ways for you to fuck with your roommates because I think that's just the nature of roommates, right? So if you really want, do me a favor, if you've got your tablet going right now, just put your stylus down, just lay it down on your tablet and then try to do something on your computer. Depending on how it lays down on the tablet, it will start doing shit all on its own. It'll especially if it moves or rolls, that kind of stuff. So I tell everybody, if you hook your tablet up to your roommate's computer and then put your tablet, hide it, put it over someplace where they can't see it and just lay the stylus on it, when they actually go to try to work on their computer, all of a sudden their mouse will start doing all sorts of weird shit. They will never be able to control it. So anyway, that sounds petty, doesn't it?
I was going to say, you must have had some really bad roommates.
Actually, I had some. I really liked most of. I'm thinking. Yeah. Anyway, all right. So enough of this. We got so much to get through, and I'm dicking around. Okay. So if you go back into that file again to our session for week number 8, there is a file called Digital Diet. If you can open that guy up. So this is a perfect example of, the reason I start with this file is for two reasons. The first is that it gives me a way to show you how we used to do this kind of retouching before Liquify became something in Photoshop. And second, to really bring out another point, and the other point about, I'll give you the story first and then you can draw your own conclusion from this. So it is rumored, I don't know if this is true, but it is rumored that, I'm trying to be delicate about this. Do you feel like you're drawn to a body type, whatever it is? They say that the body type that you're drawn to, that you're attracted to, is something that was imprinted on you when you became sexually aware. So that whatever happened to be in vogue at the time, or whatever you were seeing a lot of at the time, whatever, when you first, so in that sort of 9, 10, 11, 12 probably period of your life, when you are becoming sexually aware, whatever, that whatever is in vogue at that time, poor choice of words, but is the type that you're drawn to. Now, that may or may not be true, but in my case, actually looking back on my life and the people that I've been attracted to physically, I would say that that's probably true. So when I was that age, the number one model, the look that was happening in fashion, it was Twiggy. So Twiggy, boy body, girl with a boy body. Pretty much it. No hips, no boobs, short hair. That's what I was drawn to and still am to this day. So when I look at this image, I say to myself, her hips are too big. So in the very first version of this class that I did, there was there was actually 2 instructors here that were really responsible for the large part of the digital content in this department. They wanted to take this class. So they were both in the class, and one of the guys he was older than I was from California, and he looked at me and he leaped up and he was like, "What?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm going to make her hips smaller or thinner." And he goes, "Her hips are perfect." And he was a guy from California. He had grown up. That moment for him wasn't some twiggy skinny model. It was all these surfer girls on the beach, bikini girls, whatever, and they were all like curvy shit, whatever, and he thought her hips were perfect. The point that I'm trying to make here is that there is no right or wrong for this girl's hips. It's simply what you choose to do, or what's the intent, what's the reason behind that. That is the only thing that matters here, right? It's not that her hips are too big. It's not that I'm going to make them too small. It's got nothing to do with that. Is that fair? All right, so we are going to make her hips smaller and old school way. So the first thing to do is zoom in. It's just this one hip that I'm having a problem with right here. It's this guy right here. We're going to start with a selection. So hit the L key to get the lasso tool. And the selection that you want to make, because of the tool that we're using, what's going to happen is that I'm going to change this whole hip line that runs pretty much from the top of her sweater down to where it reconnects to her knee down here. And these are the things that you need to look for when you're doing this kind of work. You need a place to start for your retouching to begin, but you also need a place for it to end. So if I start up here, I'm going to keep the line where the sweater is actually meeting the pants. That's not going to be changed. And I'm also going to keep the line where it reconnects with her shin down at the bottom. That gives me an entry and exit point. If I don't have those, then it means if I've got to change all that, if I don't have a good spot to end, then it means I'm going to have to retouch her entire shin as well. Right? So I'm looking to keep the amount of work to a minimum here. So again, I've got a starting point where my new hip is going to start and where my new hip is going to end. And you want to try to keep those places as small as you can possibly do it. You also want to avoid the coat because if I warp this, it's going to warp the coat and then I have to reconnect the coat, and I don't want to do that either. So I'm actually going to take a look at my screen where I'm going. I'm going to actually start a selection, and I'm going to cut through this first part of her hip. I'm going to get her entire thigh in all of this, and then I'm going to come down and I'm going to exit down below her shin. So this is actually the area that I'm going to retouch right here. So you can sort of see, I just need you to make a selection that's roughly about this same size right here, and we should be good to go on this part. And then I'm going to jump this to its own layer, Command J. Again, remember, Command J, when you've got a selection going, basically does a copy and a paste. If we turn off the image that we've got on the background, you'll see this is what I've actually got on my image up here. The size of this selection that you make, it matters, because when we go to warp this thing, we get a set of controls. There's going to be a grid that gets laid out on top of this. The bigger the image is, the bigger that, the less precise that grid can be. The smaller the area that we're going to warp in here, the more precise these control handles can actually be. I'm also going to change this thing to a smart object because, again, the stuff that we're going to do is destructive. However, we're not painting on this thing, we're not healing this thing, we're not doing any of that kind of stuff. We're simply warping this, we're transforming this thing, which we can do, make it a smart object. It will be non-destructive and it will allow you to go back in and refine it later on. So to make it a smart object, I'm going to come up to the layer menu, down to smart objects and say convert to smart object. Make sure that you get that little icon in the lower right hand corner. This is now a smart object. Then I'm going to hit Command T. So with Command T, you actually, if you go to your edit menu and come down to your edit menu, you'll see that free transform has been selected. And then if you take a look right underneath it, you get the transform control tools. And in the transform control tools down here, we have scale. Let's go ahead, we're going to go through these really quickly. Go ahead and pick scale. And scale is what is picked by default. And when you do that, if you grab any of the corners, you can actually make the image smaller or larger. You'll also notice, though, if you look up at your options window up at the very top, if you've set your preferences the way I set mine, width and height does not stay in ratio with one another. You'll notice in my case, I've got a width of 106 and I've got a height of 107. So it's already distorting. If you grab an image in the one of the handles on the side and push it straight in, you'll see an even worse case scenario. I've just decreased my width considerably, but my height is almost unchanged here. So that's what's going on in terms of doing scaling. Again, if you want the scaling to stay in ratio so that the width and the height match each other, you click on the chain link between the two, and then you'll see that when you move one or the other, it changes the other respectively. So if I change the width, the height will change respectively to keep the ratio, the initial ratio intact. If I go up to my edit menu and come down to the next of the transform tools, the rotate transform tool, you can actually then, if you hover your cursor outside the transform box, I always put mine on a corner. You don't have to, you can put it on a side, but you'll get a double-headed arrow. This will allow you to actually rotate the image. You'll notice that it rotates around the anchor point that's right in the middle. You can click on that anchor point in the middle and move it. I'm going to bring mine all the way down to the handle that's at the very bottom. And now when I do the rotate, again, it rotates around that anchor point right there. So that's basically rotating. If you come up to the edit menu and down to transform again and come down to skew. Actually, let's do this first. If you look at the very top in your options palette, you'll actually see there is a, I'm over on the right-hand side. There's a thing that looks, it looks like a volleyball net to me, that's sort of. Then there's a circle with a slash through it and a check mark. If you click on the check mark, it will go ahead and apply your transform. If you click on the circle with the slash through it, it gets rid of it, and we can start this whole thing again. So I'm gone back to my original, Command T to actually start this all over again. Back up to the edit menu, down to transform, and then we are going to do skew. If you do skew and come up and grab one of these corner points and start to drag, what you'll actually see is that unlike scaling, this is actually separating this point out, and this point's sort of operating all on its own. It's attached to two other points, and they are having an impact on this as well. You can see when I've pulled this out to the right, it definitely affects the top edge of the edge that's really close to this. But the top very edge point, that side handle has not moved up or down hardly at all. It's pretty much on a straight line, so I'm not getting any distortion there. But the line that's actually coming down and connecting to my other lower right-hand corner, whatever, is being moved radically as well. So that's basically what skew is about. If you hit Command Z, you can undo that. Up to the edit menu, down to free transform again. We're going to come down to distort. In distort, all of these points become free. They're not connected to anything else. So I'm going to do that same move here again. I'm going to actually drag this, and you'll actually see it doesn't have any impact on any of my other points at all. And so what distort allows you to do, if you actually see, I'm going to grab a lower point here. it allows you to match things to another plane. So imagine I've got a photograph that's on this image, and there's a frame, and it's not just flat to my image, it's actually twisted at an angle so that it's going back into space. This will allow you to map this cutout, the thing that we've got cut out here. It will allow you to map each of the corner points to the corner points of that frame, and then whatever angle that frame is on is the angle that this image will actually emulate. Does that make sense? So again, imagine that this is a frame. If it's flat to you, then there's no change that you need to make on this image. You just put this corner here, this one here, and this one here. However, if this thing is twisted like this and going back into space, your image is here. It's flat on the front edge. It's not going back in space. You can actually use this tool to map the corners to each of the corners here, and that image will look like it's going back into space. Does that make sense, everyone? Okay. Command Z to undo that one. Command Option Z to continue to undo that one. Or just hit the circle with a line going through it. Command T to transform one more time. The last two that we need to look at, the first one up to the edit menu down to transform, is perspective. In perspective, what this does is it will actually control two handles depending on what one you pick and how you slide it. So I'm going to do the one on the very top, on the top right-hand corner. If you click and you drag that towards the top-hand corner, I'm going to actually move this whole thing out to the side so you can sort of see what's happening is, what it's doing is that it's creating convergence. And so what's happening is that those 2 points are coming together, which makes this thing appear to recede in space. And if I take the two at the bottom, I'm going to grab one of the ones at the bottom and actually make it wider. What you'll see now is that you are creating the illusion that this hip has now been laid down and it is moving back into your image, and then the part that's got the shirt on it is moving back into your image, and her knee is actually moving forward in your image right here. This is how you actually control things like parallax in buildings. So if you have buildings that are converging as they go to the top, again, as they converge, it appears that the top of your building is further away and smaller. You can use this to open it back up, that sort of thing. We're also going to use this to create floors and ceilings in our composites. So I'm going to, again, hit the circle with the slash through it and do one last one, and this is how we're really going to do this. So the last one down, again, I just hit Command T again, go to your edit menu, come down to transform. You'll see warp is at the very bottom. You can click on warp here, but warp is also that weird volleyball net looking thing that's up in the top of your top of your options bar. If you click on that, you'll see the grid that I was talking about. This is actually now laid a grid that's got control handles on it that will allow you to warp this image. So you have control handles at all the corners. You've got 2 of them on every single side. And then you've also got the intersections that exist in the middle. All of these are movable. To actually do the warping that I want to do on this person, I'm going to start with the control handles that are on the right-hand side. And the first one that I'm going to do is this one right here. So if we imagine that there's 4 control handles on the side, I'm going to do the second from the bottom. And I'm simply going to click on that and push in, and you will see what happens is that it distorts this grid, and at the same time it distorts the image. So I'm simply pushing that part of the image in to thin that hip line down. I'm then going to go after the second from the bottom, so the next point that's right above that on the side, I'm also going to grab it and push it in as well to round things out. The bottom of her hip line is still too heavy here, so now I'm going to go to one of the control points on the bottom and click to push that part up. And now I'm actually getting to where I want the hip part to actually be. Now at this stage of the game, you don't really have a preview here. However, you can use opacity. Opacity is still available to you here before we actually commit this. So you can actually drag the opacity of this down so that you can sort of see the old hip and the new hip here. And I'm thinking, okay, this part's actually working out fine for me, so this is what I'm going to do. Again, I've still got it connected to the sweater at the very top. I did not break that part apart, and I've also got it connected to her shin down at the bottom. I haven't broken that line either. So for me, this is all I really need to do on this. I'm going to drag the opacity all the way back up, and I'm going to go ahead and say OK by clicking on the check mark that's up at the very top. So if you then turn your smart object on and off, you can see that we've actually narrowed her hip down. However, sometimes the entry and the exit of this are not exactly what you want them to be, so we can refine this even more. To do that, I'm going to put an opaque layer mask on this change. To do it, hold down your Option key and click on Add Layer Mask, and it'll add a black layer mask. If you can't remember that shortcut, simply add a layer mask and invert it, Command I. If you can't remember that, simply add a layer mask, and there is an invert button. If you click on the mask and you look down low enough, there is an invert button in the Properties panel, and simply click on that. Basically what I'm doing is I'm hiding the new hip. Then I'm going to grab a brush, the B key, make it a smaller brush. I'm going to make this a relative hard brush because I want I can't make it a totally hard brush because then you'll see the line where the new one meets the old one. But I'm going to make it close to hard. So I'm going to bring it up to around a 75%. That should be close enough. Normal blending mode, 100% opacity, 100% flow. And then white is my foreground color. You can slowly start to paint in the correction right here. And I'm going to stop right when I get close to that part right here. And I might leave it at this. Sometimes if you've got a pattern in the material, because you'll see, I haven't only gotten the only hip. The only thing I did was I changed a very, very, very small part of it. But if this didn't match up with the fabric that was continuing it, you could continue to work on more of the fabric. So again, the seam that's going right down her, the edge of those pants needs to be added to the transform here. So that's basically how I'm doing mine, and this is how I would actually narrow her hip out. And if you zip back out, you can actually see it does a really good job of it. So liquefy is not your only option in all of this. This tool actually works out really well if the occasion presents itself. Questions about this? All right, we can close this guy up. You do not need to save that. The next file that I want to go for, which is in our assignment folder, is Man and His Belly. I did not name this file. Double click that. If you open up in something other than Photoshop, let me know. I can tell you how it'll always open in Photoshop. Did this open in preview for anybody? Or if it opened in something else, I'm going to show you how to fix that part really quickly. So go back to your Finder, click once on the file, hit Command I, or go up to the File menu and do Get Info. And down at the sort of bottom of this Get Info dialog box that opens up, there'll be an Open With and a drop-down menu. And in the drop-down menu, it should list pretty much everything that you can open a JPEG with. In your case, it's probably set to Preview. You want to change that to whatever version of Photoshop it is that you're using. So if you do that, then when you double click on this file, this JPEG, it will open into Photoshop. If you want everything, every JPEG to open in Photoshop, at that very same spot down at the bottom, you want to click on this Change All, and then this Change All right down here, and click on that. It'll give you this warning. Are you sure you want Photoshop to open all of these JPEGs? And you'll say yes, hit continue. It's already how mine's set up, so it doesn't matter. Then when you double click on it, it will open up in Photoshop. If you didn't get this warning, let me know. Who didn't get it? If you didn't get this warning, say what? Huh. That's weird. Where it said it can't open it?
Yeah, but I just pressed change all and tried to open it again, and it worked.
It did open? Oh, okay. So here, let's try this really quickly. Go ahead and say OK. Do Command-I. And go all the way down. That's going to open with Photoshop. Go ahead and hit Change All. And say yes. And then double click. And you should be good. And you got the warning you wanted. All right, everybody else got that warning, right? Color warning? All right. It matters because that tells me that your color space is set up correctly. Okay. All right. So the first thing we're going to do is make a copy of this image. Command-J to copy it. Second thing we're going to do is make a smart object out of this, because again, liquefying is destructive move, but if we keep it as a smart object, then it's non-destructive. We will get the illusion of it, but it is non-destructive. So up to the layer menu, down to smart objects, and then convert to smart object. So we can now actually go to work on this image. To get to the liquefy tool, come up to the filter menu, down to liquefy. Again, liquefy up until 3 years ago did not work on smart objects. Now it does. It was a game changer. So I'm going to go ahead and do liquefy. This will bring me into a brand new space. This is the liquefy tool space, and we need to sort of go through what each of these tools are and what the controls are on the other side. So if we start up on the left-hand side, if you actually click on the tool at the very top on the left-hand side, the thing that looks like a finger that pushes, this is called the forward warp tool. And the forward warp tool, hang on one second, let me get to my notes on this guy really quick. Okay, so every one of these tools has its own separate set of properties. So if you look at the top of your properties panel, the brush size is normal. It's the brush size. The density, and it's unfortunate that Photoshop doesn't change these names, but it doesn't change these names to match what these controls are in, so that they are the same as the names in Photoshop. Size is the same. Density is the hardness of your brush. To show you what I mean by this, we're not going to start with that top tool. I want you to come down. There is a tool sort of almost down near the bottom. It looks like a brush, and then right underneath it, it looks like an eraser. If you can click on the thing that looks like a brush, it's called the Freeze Mask tool. If you can click on that, you can still use your bracket keys to make your brush larger or smaller. And then I'm simply going to click once. If you get this message that comes up and says the Show Mask checkbox is preventing the preview from showing this, say OK. Otherwise, you should have gotten a red dot on this thing. To get to where you can actually see that red dot, what that just placed down, you need to come down under Mask Options, and you want to click on Show Mask, and then you'll see the little red dot. So does everybody have a red dot on their screen? Okay. If you take your density all the way down to 0 and put down another red dot, you'll actually see it's got a soft edge. If you drag the density all the way up to 100 and put down a dot, you'll see it's got a completely hard edge. So unfortunately for Photoshop, they did not change this density to say hardness, which is what it is. Does this make sense to everyone? So again, you just need to think about density as hardness on here. So I'm going to stay with these brushes right here. Pressure is actually works like, again, an airbrush tool. So if we click pressure and drag it all the way up, and then you click and hold down, you'll see very quickly it becomes totally red. If you drop your pressure all the way down to like 1 and click, you'll see that you've got to hold this forever. You've actually almost got to sort of jiggle it around and move it for it ultimately to get to be red. So what this thing does is it controls how fast your liquefying happens. Yes? You don't get the red? we'll click on, you do have show mask. Go all the way up to the top. Oh, you're doing erase. It's the one above it. And now try it. Make your brush bigger. You'll never be able to see it. Yeah, great. Then along with pressure, you have rate. So if we click our rate and drag it up, you'll see you can't do it. Some tools work with rate, some tools do not. What rate is it's also how fast this action happens. So if we want to get rid of all of these little dots on here, because I want to get rid of mine, you come over to your mask options in your properties part and click on none, and it will get rid of them. And now we've got sort of a fresh slate that we can see it with. If we drag your pressure up into like 50 and then you simply click and hold, you don't see any, it'll put down this lot. But if you move your brush even slightly, it actually starts to build more on here. This is like flow. So your pressure here is the equivalent of flow. Rate, if you have it, and we don't get it with this tool, but rate, if you have it, you don't have to move your cursor at all. It just happens. It's like the airbrush icon that you use for flow in all of the brushes that we use in Photoshop. Does that make sense? Okay, so we can hit none here to actually get rid of that and go back up to the forward warp tool. The default for usually in all of these, and you'll see I have no rate here with the forward warp tool as well, is 50% pressure and 50% density. So it gives you a brush that's right in the middle, it's half soft, half hard, and then your pressure is again how fast things are going to happen. So I'm going to make my brush about the size of a penny, and I'm simply going to click on it and drag it through that guy's head. And that's basically how the forward warp tool works. You can do this repeatedly. You can continue to work it here repeatedly, and you'll see it just makes the whole thing happen. You can build on this slowly, I guess is what I'm really trying to say. You'll also notice that it fades off on the edges because I've actually got a density. I've got a soft brush on the end. To get this to go back to its original, if you look at the very bottom of your properties panel, there is a brush reconstruct options. You can click on reconstruct. It will actually open up a dialog box and say, how much of this do you want us to reconstruct? Now, this reconstruction is global. So if you've done a whole bunch of work on this and you only want to fix this one area, this is not the tool to use. This will do things for the entire image. But you can click on the slider and you can drag this from 100 all the way back to 0, and 0 will get you back to what the image looked like originally, and say OK. If we do 2 more distortions like that again, there's another button down at the bottom that is called Restore All. If you click on that, it will go back. If you do distort his face again and also distort his knees again right here, so I'm just going to do both of these. If you only want to fix his face and you don't want to fix his knees, you don't use either one of these controls. You actually use the next tool down on the left-hand side. The next tool down is the Reconstruct tool. If you click on that, again, it has its own size, it has its own density, it has its own pressure, and this one does have rate. So if we take a look, I'm going to actually drop my pressure all the way down to 1. I'm going to put my rate down at 0, and I'm going to make my brush smaller, about the size of this guy's head. And with this, we're actually going to just start scrubbing across this, and you will see that it's slowly returning that dent that's in that guy's face. It's slowly bringing it back. If, however, I put my cursor right down on top of it and just press down, it does a little bit and then it just stops. If I take my pressure up to like 50% and do the same thing, I'm going to click on it, you'll see that it's more extreme what happens. But again, if I click on this and I don't move my cursor, that's the end of it all. It doesn't continue to do any more work. If, however, you take your rate and drag it up to 100% and do that same click, you'll actually see it continues to do that work over a period of time until you hit the edge of the brush. And then if you want it to be all back, you simply drag and you paint across the entire thing, and it will get rid of all of that work for you. Did this work for everyone? We good? Okay, but you'll notice that the knees didn't change at all. I'm going to click on Restore All to get the knees to actually do that. We're going to zoom into this guy's belly really quickly. I am going to do a small brush now, forward warp. So go back up to the very top tool. I'm going to make this really small. What I want to do is give this guy cellulite on his stomach. I want to give you the illusion that it's not a very good liquefying, that it's more cellulite-like. So I'm going to use the defaults of my brush. I've got a 50% opacity, a 50% density. My brush size is 40 if you want the same as mine. And I'm just going to do marks in here that are sort of make it look like mountains. And you can see, again, cellulite-y, sort of alligator, profile-y kind of stuff, whatever. Not a very good convincing taking care of or trying to thin his stomach out here again at all. But what I want to show you is the next tool down. This is a relatively new one for Liquify. So again, over on the far left-hand side, it's the third tool down. This tool is called the Smooth tool. And it does pretty much exactly what it says it's going to do. I'm going to make my brush a little bit smaller. It does have a pressure. I tend to keep the pressure and the rate slow on this brush. And the reason I do that is that what I'm trying to do is I want to smooth these things out. But if I've got my pressure and my rate too high, ultimately this will restore it. This will work like the tool right above it. It'll bring it back to its complete restoration. What I want to do is keep some of this that's pushed in, but I want to smooth the line out. So I'm going to start using I'm not going to paint directly across this with the meat of my brush. I'm going to work at using just the edge of my brush. Again, I've got a 50% density, so it's using a softer edge on the edge of this, which should hopefully give me a little bit more control. And I'm simply going to start scrubbing in down along this line. Now, in doing that, this doesn't happen fast enough for me, so I'm going to boost my pressure up to like a 50% and then start it again. And now it's actually beginning to work for me the way I want it to ultimately work. It's beginning to bring that line back in without completely going back to restoring it in its entirety. So if you click on Restore All, you'll see it pops back out even more. So what this tool allows you to do is any areas in your liquefying that seem to have too many bumps, you need to smooth those edges out. This is the tool that you use to do it. If we zip back out and go up to this guy's face, we're going to go to the next tool down. The next tool down is the Pucker tool. So if you click on it, I'm going to use a larger brush, and I'm going to do this right over his head. So a little bit larger brush here to control this. Again, I'm going to do a brush size of 700. I'm going to bring my pressure up. Oh, I don't have pressure on this. I do have a rate. So in this tool, you don't get pressure, you get rate. So what happens is that it's going to do its work over a period of time. I'm going to set mine up to 50. And then I'm simply going to come right in the middle of this guy's head, and I'm going to drop my cursor down and just hold it. And you'll see, because I don't have pressure here, it continues without me moving the brush at all. It continues to do it over time. And what it's doing is it's actually making this center area of this brush smaller, and as it starts to move out, keeping the areas less small. So it's doing basically a pucker of this. If I hit Command Z to undo that, it will come right back out. If you hold down your Option key and you do the exact same move, you get the Bloat tool, which is actually making his head in the center bigger in the areas. Then the liquefying fades off as I start to get out to those edges. Again, this is the Bloat tool, which is the tool right underneath the Pucker tool in the toolbar on the left. These two are opposite of one another. So you don't really need both. You only need one with the Option key. So if I click the tool that's right underneath the Pucker tool, the Bloat tool, that's the one I just used to make his head giant. If I again make my brush smaller, I'm going to again keep my pressure. Don't have pressure. I'm going to bring my rate up to about 50%. And I'm going to click again on the center of his head. You'll see it continues to sort of like inflate the balloon, but if I hold down the Option key, it will actually deflate it, and it will bring it back. If I click on Restore All, it will get rid of that part so that that part doesn't happen. The next tool down is the Push to the Left tool. It's not only push to the left. This is how it's the default. It's what happens to it, but I will show you how this works. Again, it has its own settings. I'm going to leave my brush size. 400 pixels is fine. A density of 50 is fine. I am going to bring my pressure up to 50, and I'm going to bring my rate up. Oh, it doesn't have a rate, so I'm not going to use that. What this tool does is that it's easiest to see this probably on his shorts. That's where we'll actually start this. I'm going to start on the back pair of shorts right here. If I wanted it to appear that this guy is turned more toward, in his case, it would be more counterclockwise. If he turned counterclockwise in real life, I would see less of that back short right here. The back shorts right here, I would see less of them. That's what the Push to the Left tool is going to do for me. So watch my screen to see how to use this guy before you actually do it. What you do is you actually set a point. So I'm going to click down and then you push your brush up. When you go up, it pushes pixels to the left. If you hit Command Z and undo that and start at the top now and click and drag down, a downward movement will push this tool will push everything to the right. So upward motion pushes pixels to the left, downward motion pushes pixels to the right. Command Z to undo that. If you move right to left, so I'm going to drag right across the bottom of his shorts going right to left, it pushes things down. If you hit Command Z to undo that and go left to right, it pushes things up. To be perfectly honest with you, people who do a huge amount of liquefying tool, this is the hardest of the tools to really master, but it's the one everybody ultimately ends up going to. The thing to remember about it though is this. I'm going to hit Command Z to undo that. I'm going to make his shorts a little bit thinner. If you click and drag up, so that made his shorts a little bit thinner. If you then drag down in the effort, feeling like scrubbing back and forth is going to only move to the left, it doesn't. When you come back down, it moves everything to the right. So you simply need to reset and you continue to click and scrub up. So I'm just going to continue to scrub up like that. I have just turned this guy's body now because less of his shorts are showing. Did that make sense, everyone? Did that work? Okay, let's say I want to get rid of his shorts altogether. That backside, I don't want to see that backside anymore. The problem is that as I continue to use this tool, I can get pretty close, but then at a certain stage of the game, I start having an impact on the short pant leg that's closest to me. That's not what I want to do. I simply want to collapse this. So if you've done all this, hit Restore All to bring everything back. We go to the next tool down, and it is the Freeze tool. It's the one that we were using for the brush to see what it was like. The Freeze tool actually will freeze pixels so that you cannot actually change them using any of the liquefy tools. So I'm going to make my brush a little bit smaller, and I'm going to simply paint on this. In this case, I'm going to leave my density. I'm going to leave it, I'm not going to go to a total 100, but I'm going to leave it up to like around a 90, something like that. I want to be able to paint this line that is the line of his shorts. I don't want it perfectly straight because it'll look like it's been cut out, but I want it pretty close to that. So I'm going to simply click and paint this, and I'm going to paint a line down to keep the front of his shorts. And you can go past this. All I've done now is freeze those parts of his shorts. I'm also going to do another line to freeze the zipper part, the part that I'm actually seeing up in the front. And so this is now areas that are frozen. And to see what that actually means, you don't even have to use the Push to the Left tool now. We can actually use the Forward Warp tool. So the very top one, I'm going to select it again. I'm going to make it larger. And then I'm going to simply grab these shorts and I'm going to just start to push them in. And you'll see as you start to push this stuff in, once it hits that freeze line, it will not distort anymore. It will not let that actually happen. Now sometimes it's difficult to see the line that you're actually pushing into. In my case, because again, you've got this red thing that's on top of it. If you don't want to see the red thing, but you want it to still work, first off, hit Restore All. Restoring all does not get rid of your frozen areas. Those stay intact. However, if you uncheck the Show Mask right here, it will go away, but it is still there. And if you do your crush again here, you can see that it all goes all the way in here, and that part's actually done. Now in my case, again, that using a 93 on my brush didn't give me the line that I really wanted, because I can still see a small section of that. So in that case, I would actually go back and redo my freeze and actually keep that line in. Does this make sense, everyone, what's going on? Turn on Show Mask again. If you are working on a red image, a red mask is not going to help you at all, so you can use the drop down in your properties to change the color of your mask to something else. I just changed mine to blue. It doesn't have any impact on the mask at all. It's simply the color that you're seeing. So I'm going to go back to red. That is the default color. The next tool down underneath it is the Thaw tool. If you click on the Thaw tool and make it a little bit smaller, this is how you can go in and change things on your mask. So you can go in and thaw areas out. And now that I've actually thawed this whole front line out, and if I go to my push forward tool, now that area has been thawed out. Not all of it. The area that's still under red is still frozen. Does this make sense to everyone, what's going on? Okay. Over in the Properties panel under Mask Options, if you click None, it gets rid of your brush. If you click on Mask All, it will put the mask over everything. If you then hit None again, it will remove the mask. I'm going to click on Restore All to get back to everything, and then we're going to zip into this guy's head. And let's say I only want to impact this guy's head. I want to freeze everything else. Well, you could go to the Freeze tool, the brush, and you could start to paint on everything else, and it would take too much time. I'm going to hit Command-Z to undo that. Instead, what you would do is you click on the Mask All option. It puts your mask on everything, and then you grab the Thaw tool, and you simply paint over his face to thaw it out. And now I can do anything that I do will only impact his head. It will not impact anything else. Make sense? Again, if I click on Invert All, it will invert the mask, and now his head is frozen, and I can do anything to his body. We good on all of these parts?
Show image and mask all, and then I copy the pressure and this thing, and then this thing right here.
You need to click on Show Mask. Well, you don't really have anything to invert, but if you did, so click on the Thaw tool, paint over his face. Perfect. Yeah, that's good enough. Whatever. And then if you click Invert All, that will be frozen. Everything else will be thawed. It's just a way to flip back and forth really quick. I don't use I use the Freeze tool and the Thaw tool all the time. This whole mask everything and unmask everything, it's just, I don't really use it a whole lot. The next tool down is to do faces. We don't have faces in here. I've got a file that we will look at faces later, and we will do that part later. And then again, the hand allows you to move around, but so does the space bar. That will give you the hand no matter what tool you've got. The magnifying glass allows you to zoom in. If you hold down the Option key, you can zoom out. But again, no matter what tool you've got, I'm going to select the Forward Warp tool. If I hold down, again, the same keyboard shortcuts in Photoshop, Spacebar Command will give me the magnifying glass. If I add the Option key to it, it will give me the negative magnifying glass. I'm going to then click on None to get rid of my options, right? To get rid of any sort of mask that I've actually got going on here. And we need to talk about how to actually work with these tools to do the kind of work that we're looking to do. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually thin this guy's belly down a little bit. And this is the trick to working. If you don't take anything else away from doing this, the two things for working with the Liquify tool are this. Number one, use Smart Objects. Number two, you want to use the biggest brush that you can use, and you want to use the smallest movements and the most number of movements that you can do to actually make the tool work. So again, big brushes, really small movements, and tons of small movements. Does that make sense, everyone? All right, so we're going to go after the belly first. So to do that, I am going to do the push the forward warp tool, the very top one right in here. I'm going to leave it at its default. I'm going to, oh, one other thing I meant to show you. Let me zip back out here. If you zip back out and you take a look at your whole image, I'm going to do this with the forward warp tool. So I'm going to grab it. I'm going to make it a little bit larger. But I'm going to start outside of my image right here. So I'm starting outside the frame of my image. And I'm going to click and drag across. And when I do that, oh, hang on one second. I'm going to click and drag across. Oh, I have got a copy of this image visible underneath where I am right now. You need to cancel, if you've got this, hit cancel out of this to go back, turn off the background version, because this will show you what's actually happening in the Liquify to the background as well. So again, simply turn the eyeball off, go back into filter, back into Liquify. Again, grab the forward warp tool, which I've got, and then I'm going to click and drag across this. And it is still not showing that. Is anybody getting transparent pixels showing? I'm not. You should have transparent pixels showing in this. Let me uncheck my background. All right, I'm going to uncheck my background, but that shouldn't be showing up because my background is turned off. But at any rate, you'll get this. So you'll see these transparent pixels. What's happening is that your liquefying is tearing this edge away. Hit restore all to keep that from happening, because you don't really want that to happen. You can click on this pin edges. If you do that, then your liquefy tool will work on this, but it will never pull the stuff away from the edges. So it'll distort this, but it won't pull away from the edges. So I'm going to click on restore all right now. So I'm going to make my brush a little bit smaller to really control it. If I don't want to have an impact on his shorts, and I don't want to have an impact on his shorts right now, and it's hard to get a brush in to control his stomach without dealing with the shorts, but that's what I'm going to do. First thing I'm going to do is freeze the shorts. So I'm going to grab the freeze tool and simply paint a line across the shorts, just as a protection here. Again, I don't like working with this thing visible, so I'm going to unshow it, but be careful. You need to remember that it's actually there. I'm going to go to the forward warp tool, and I've actually got a pretty good size forward warp tool right now. I've got a 500 pixel size. Again, my pressure is 50. My density is also at 50. And I'm simply going to come over here and I'm going to start doing very light taps. Again, I'm doing lots of light taps just to try to pull in a lot of light taps, working on the very edge of this. Every one of these, if you can see my cursor, looks like a small little tap on here. Don't always think, though, that you need to make only one thing smaller. We actually need to make certain things larger because his stomach is in relative size to his torso, to his upper chest as well. So this has actually worked out pretty good for me. I'm going to turn on my show mask again so that I can see what's going on here. I'm going to get rid of the mask by clicking on none. And in this case right now, I'm happy with his stomach. I'm going to freeze his stomach right now and go after his chest. So I'm going to click on the freeze tool. I'm going to paint across his stomach. I'm not going to go all the way up to where that little divot looks in right below his boobs. I'm not going to go that far up because I need a transition area to actually happen in here someplace. So I can't just go from one place where nothing's happening to a place where a great deal is actually happening. I don't want to do that part. I'm also going to freeze his shoulder and the back side of his chest here, because I want to build his chest out forward. I don't want to build it out backwards. I'm also probably going to freeze his chin and his neck here as well. I'm going to freeze all of this so that my tool doesn't actually change these parts and leave the middle part of his chest opened here. Again, I'm going to turn off the show mask so that I don't see it. And now I'm going to go to the bloat tool. So again, it's the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's the 6th one down. And I'm going to hover this over his chest, make it a little bit smaller. I'm going to leave my density up at a 50. I don't have a rate, pressure in here. I do have a rate, and I'm actually going to drag the rate down because I'm going to do it like a 15. I want to see what's going to happen here slowly. So then I'm simply going to click on his chest. And I'm just clicking and tapping here a little bit. I can actually bring my rate up a little bit more. So I'm going to bring it up to like a 30, and hopefully that won't take off on me too much. So I'm bringing up his chest a little bit more. I don't like the little divot now that's sort of like between one of those boobs. His back boob is now bigger than his front one. So I'm actually going to tap on his front one to make that guy just a little bit larger as well. I don't like the divot that's actually happening in between the two. I actually feel like his stomach needs to go in now a little bit more. Again, his stomach has been frozen. I can thaw that completely out, so I'm going to click on none. That gets rid of all of it. You can turn on your mask to show it, but I clicked on none. They got rid of all the freezing. I'm going to go back to the forward warp tool and make it a little bit smaller. And then I'm just going to tap this part in so that I feel like I've got a better line that's running into his chest. If you want to see your before and after, there is a check mark down at the very bottom that says preview. You can actually click on your preview part and you can sort of see what you've done. If we feel like we overdid his boobs right here, which I sort of feel like we overdid that just a little bit, it seems to be distorting a little bit too much for me anyway, we can again go back. I'm going to use the smooth tool to do this, and on the smooth tool I'm making it a little bit larger, and I'm going to drop my pressure down and my rate down as well, and I'm just going to start to work over this edge a little bit, and I'm just running back and forth. It's not doing a lot of smoothing for me. It's not restoring a lot. So instead, I'm going to go to the next tool up, which is the reconstruct tool. You definitely want to drag this down. So pressure is way down, rate is way down, because I don't want this thing to all of a sudden go bam right back to the way it started. I need to bring this back slowly, and then I can work on this to sort of bring this back just a little bit, and that feels a little bit better to me right now. Turn on the preview on and off. I'm feeling pretty good about this. I feel like the guy's arm now is actually way too skinny for everything else that's going on here, especially his upper arm right here, his lower arm. Part of it is being foreshortened because his elbow is actually closer to the image. So he's standing, he's not standing like this, he's standing like this. So this arm is coming towards the screen, but this part is actually being foreshortened. That's why it's smaller. So again, I can use the bloat tool to actually get this arm to be larger. First thing I'm going to do is freeze the area that's around it. So I'm going to turn on my mask so I can see it. I'm going to freeze the elbow up here. I'm going to freeze his body. I'm going to freeze his hand. And I'm going to freeze this part down in here. I'm also going to freeze his elbow. And again, if you want the transition to be a little bit smoother, you would want to push your density down. I feel like the density here is a little too strong, so I'm going to hit none again to get rid of that part, and I'm going to bring my density down to like a 50. So I get a little bit softer edge there, so the transition comes in a little bit more, and that feels a little bit better. And then again, I'm going to turn off the visibility of the mask so I can watch this in real time. I am going to do the bloat tool. I'm going to make it smaller. And then you can take the bloat tool and you can click and drag across. I grabbed the wrong tool, so I'm going to hit Command Z to undo that and actually get the bloat tool, not the pucker tool. Make it a little bit smaller and click and drag it across here. And it actually bulked up that arm a little bit. I can actually do it a little bit more. That looks like a little bit of distortion to me. So I typically go after the smooth tool first to try to undo things. So I'm going to work this tool back and forth across that lower part of his arm. And you can see it's starting to push that in. And it's also starting to shape his wrist a little bit more. So this is like my change right now. And I'm feeling better about that part of it. So you sort of get where this whole thing is going. Is this working for you guys? Okay, there's one other thing I want to get to really quickly. So, a couple of things to think about. If you say okay to this right now, it actually makes the changes, but you'll see that the change is actually a smart filter. If you double click on that smart filter, you go right back into Liquify and you continue to work on this. You can continue to refine this guy. Does that make sense to everyone? However, I'm going to say okay again. You can also do a second liquify. So instead of double clicking on this and opening it up, I can come back up to the filter again and come down to liquefy. Do not pick the one at the very top. If you pick the liquefy at the very top, it will do the very same liquefy we've just done. So it'll make his stomach even skinnier and his chest even bigger and his arm even bigger. You don't want to do that. You want to pick liquefy from the drop-down menu all over again. This starts off with a brand new version. However, the first liquefy has been applied. So that's still working for him. So now let's say I want to make his pants, I want to lift his pants up on his waist just a little bit more. So I'm going to go to the push forward warp tool, and I'm simply going to grab his pants, and I'm actually going to just try to lift this stuff up to make it look a little bit better. If I want to close his zipper, you should already know how to do that because we just did something very similar. I'm going to pick the freeze tool, make it smaller. The freeze tool, yeah, I'm going to drag its density all the way up into the sort of 90s because it's a sort of a soft line up here. And I'm simply going to then turn on my mask so I can see it. And I'm going to paint this line right into here. Then I'm going to go to the forward warp tool, make it smaller as well, and simply close his zipper up. Again, I'm not going to completely kill that line right there, but that's how I've basically done it now. Zip back out. Forward warp tool again, just to lift the front of his shorts up just a little bit more. I'm going to run my way along the line. And that part works out for me. Again, this is my preview on and off. That's what I've done. I'm going to say OK to this. You've now got a second liquefy filter that is only dealing with his shorts. So if you want to segregate your moves in here, the first one, if I turn it off, is going to be his shorts, the one that's at the top. If I turn off the one at the bottom, it's actually going to be his stomach version. You can do as many liquefies of this as you want, so you can do this in increments. Does this make sense, everyone? Okay, one last thing to show you. You can close this up. Are there any questions about this so far? You can't name it. But the minute you jump in, you'll see. You can turn them on and off, and you'll see what happens. Okay, last one I want to show you really quickly is the face. It's really quickly, we'll go through it. So there's a file in there called Twin Sisters. If you double click on that, again, we're going to jump this to its own layer. Command J makes a copy of it. We are going to change this to Filter, Smart Objects, Convert to Smart Object, and then up to Liquefy. In Liquefy, if you then look on your brush options, it's the tool, you can pick the tool. It's the one that looks like a head that's over on the left-hand side. If you click on it, it will actually give you the face liquefy aware. If you click on this opened up face right here, you will actually see, because I've got two figures going on right here, that you've got two faces. So in this drop-down menu, you can pick face number 1 or face number 2, so that when we change certain things about this faces, it's not both. But this is using artificial intelligence to find the faces and to find the pieces of their face, and look what you can do. I'm going to go back to my face number 1, which is the face on this on the left-hand side. You can actually use the links, the chain links between all of these to click on this one. Now I will change both eye sizes to make them bigger or smaller. You can actually lift the eyes up or down. You can actually make them wider or more narrow. You can actually, sorry, I didn't do locks on all of these. You can tilt the eyes up or down. You can actually lift the nose height up or down. You can make it thinner or wider. You can actually give her more of a smile, less of a smile. You can actually increase the width of her upper lip or make it narrower. You can actually do the same on her lower lip or bigger. You can actually make her mouth wider or more narrow. And finally, you can raise her mouth up or raise it down, sort of opening it up or opening it down. You can change the forehead to make it larger or more narrow, smaller down. You can lift her chin up or lift it down, take it down. You can actually bring her jawline out, give her more of a square face, or in a more of a triangle face. And then finally, her entire face you can make wider or more narrow. Then you can go to face number 2 and do whatever you want to do on that. Then you can do unlimited faces on this. So if you've got a portrait of 15 people, you'll get 15 of these drop-down faces. Say what? Oh, it is weird, but I got to be honest with you. So the one thing that you should know about this is that in advertising, this is a truism. In advertising, every single advertising picture that you've seen, they make the eyes 10% larger. If you're in Japan, they make it 20% larger. And this is how to do it. Trying to do it on your own with a transform tool, you'll hate your life. Are there any questions about any of this? Okay. The assignment is pretty self-evident. If you have any questions about it, just email me and I'll see you guys next week. Yes? Yeah. Oh, fine, I'll take care of it. Just make sure, and if I don't, just shoot me another email, but I will.
Should I just like reinstall it? Because like I tried doing that, and then when I opened it, it just did it itself. Like,
Oh, go ahead and say okay. Let's just take this from the top. Quit Photoshop and start it again. Let me stop the video and I'll be right there. Yes.